Do you want your business to grow faster? Are you open to new and out-of-the-box ways to drive revenues and increase value? How do you imagine the most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders double, triple, or expand their businesses tenfold or more? This is a weekly podcast featuring conversations with business owners, executives, and leaders as we reveal behind-the-scenes details that give you, our listeners, the confidence to pursue your own deal-driven growth. On the show, we discuss a huge variety of deals, everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions, capital raising, joint ventures, strategic alliances, real estate, affiliate and sponsorship deals, and more, including smaller deals that you can do without significant capital. My name is Corey Kupfer, and I've been supporting deal-driven growth for businesses for over 35 years as a successful entrepreneur, professional negotiator, and attorney. My goal is to help you strategize, plan for, find, and complete deals that will help your company grow faster. Welcome to the DealQuest Podcast. Let's get started. DealQuest community, I'm so excited to introduce you to a remastered episode of the DealQuest Podcast. The podcast has grown so much. We started it about 5 years ago now, at least at the point I'm recording this. In the beginning, had maybe 60 or 80 listeners per episode. We now have many multiples of that. In fact, we've got almost 100 times that. And I realized that there were so many great interviews I did early on in the podcast. In fact, in the first year of the podcast, it wasn't even called DealQuest. It was called Fueling Deals until we rebranded it. And we interviewed some amazing entrepreneurs and deal makers and, just amazing stories, amazing content. And I know that so many of our listeners have joined us over the last several years and may not have heard some of those earlier episodes from 5 years ago, 4 years ago, even 3 years ago. So we have picked the best of those old episodes, and the advice and the stories and the experiences are timeless. So we've remastered them, made sure the audio is great, and put in our new intro and outro, that kind of stuff. And we're going to be re-releasing some of these amazing episodes. So look out for them from time to time. And here's one coming up right now. Channing Hamlet is a managing director at Objective Investment Banking and Valuation, focused on leading the firm's valuation advisory service practice and transaction execution for its investment banking services practice. Mr. Hamlet is a results-driven executive that has 30 plus years of experience advising owners on management issues, transaction execution, and business valuation. He's able to draw on a diverse background that includes direct management experience, as well as strategy consulting, private equity investing, investment banking, and business appraisal experience to advise his clients. He's very involved in the LA and San Diego business communities. He's spoken at all kinds of organizations, including EO, which I've been a member of for a long time, and I've had EO conversations, and he's got all kinds of awards, including most recently chosen as the investment banking visionary for 2022 and 2021 in Banking and Finance magazine. You can check out the rest of his accolades and credentials in the show notes, but I am super excited to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. I'll have to have you follow me around so you can introduce me wherever I go. That was great.
There we go. I can be Channing Hamlet's hype man.
Yeah.
So Channing, before we get into all the great stuff you do in the investment banking, the valuation areas, and the experience you have with deals, and, maybe some good stories, I want to take you back to when you were a little kid growing up, maybe 8, 10, 12 years old. What did you want to be? Because my guess is at that age, probably wasn't an investment banker and valuation expert, but you tell me.
It's an interesting question, and it probably changed by the week. I was a kid that didn't enjoy doing anything indoors. If you gave me the choice between piano lessons or, jumping dirt bikes across a creek or doing this or doing that, I was like outdoors. So I always thought I'd do something outdoors. However, my parents were both pretty into business, and my dad was a pretty successful executive. And he frequently would have out of town visitors and bring people over to the house for dinner. And so a lot of the family dinners were centered around people that were, talking about a business deal or a business issue or transaction or something like that. And so I grew up a little bit in the sort of transaction and business environment, and probably that planted the seed to get me where I am today.
So even as a little kid, did you pay attention to those conversations, or, because some kids are like, done with dinner, can I go watch my program, right?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And frankly, I think I don't feel like I had a lot of choice in leaving the dinner table early. It was back in the day where you were seen and not heard or whatever. So yeah.
I know.
I didn't have my iPhone under the table where I could play games at dinner. So
yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure.
Yeah.
All right, good stuff. And look, one other question looking back, what was your first deal that you can remember of any type? It could be something small when you're, a youngster, or it could be early in your career, or whatever comes to mind.
One of the ones that comes to mind is I worked for a couple of years at a consulting firm, and then through a kind of an interesting turn of events, got involved in investment banking. And the consulting firm I worked for, our clients were Fortune 50 companies. And so we were doing presentations to the CEO or board of directors. And these were kind of large companies that were slow moving and fairly bureaucratic. And then I got involved at Legg Mason doing M&A. And the guys I worked for at the time had a really strong family-oriented family business practice. And the second transaction I worked on was a third generation family business that had kind of fallen on hard times. And we were hired to sell the company. And it was a really complicated and difficult transaction. I won't bore you with all the issues that came up, but at the closing dinner, the patriarch of the family pulled me aside and he kind of said, look, I really appreciate all the hard work you and your firm did. You guys changed our family's life. And, we're really grateful for you. And I'm pretty sure he said that to everybody. And it was like kind of a throwaway comment after dinner or whatever. But it really kind of hit me. It's like, I really like this working with these smaller family companies where we can come in and make a difference. Like it feels good and, we can really make a difference. And I was kind of like hooked on working with smaller companies and entrepreneurs and, using the skills to help them. So that moment is kind of a memorable moment. A memorable moment for me and was sort of formative in the direction of my career at some level, I think.
Love it. Love it. Yeah, so let's talk about that now. So are those the types of clients, who are you working with? Who's your ideal client? And give us obviously we mentioned the investment banking and valuation services, but, give us the full scope of the kind of services.
Yeah. Our firm now we have two practices. We have a business valuation practice where we're kind of a full service appraisal company. We have a wide range of clients that we serve there from very small companies to public companies. And it's a full service valuation practice. And then our investment banking practice, we've really specialized and we focus on what I would say lower middle market transactions. Most of our transactions are between kind of 10 to 25 million in value at the low end up to maybe 100, 150 million in value at the high end. The largest transaction our firm has closed is about $500 million. But, typically they're in the 50 to 75 million range. And so our clients are typically either family owned businesses that have passed from one generation to the next and or founder owner, non-institutionally owned companies. And, they hire us to help manage the process to exit and get their company sold.
Yeah. So, and, I love that space as well. I mean, really, that's where we do most of our deals as well. Like you, we've done some bigger ones. But, the sweet spot, I'm thinking about deals we did this year, which was a lot of them. Yeah. And most of them was somewhere, we did a deal as small as $4 million on the buy side because we were representing the buyer. But most of the other deals were in the $25 to $90 million range. I'm thinking about 6 of them right in that range that we did in the last second half of the year. So yeah, that's a fun range. But, it also brings up different issues, right? Because you're representing and working with successful entrepreneurs. Obviously, they're not going to get valuations in the tens of millions if they're not successful. But at the same time, they don't have the kind of sophisticated deal teams and prep and things that, bigger companies that sell do, right? So talk a little bit about, in addition to obviously packaging and shopping and putting it together and creating a process and doing the best deal, like what is it specific to this market, the additional things that you bring that help, let's call them non-professional sellers, right, to get deals done?
It's been interesting. It's been interesting how the market's changed over the last 25 years. I think that the buyers have kind of continued to raise the standards that they're looking for.
Yep.
In the mid 1990s, private equity firms were paying 4 to 6 times EBITDA for companies. It was rare that a company sold for north of 6, a middle market company sold for north of 6 times EBITDA.
Yep.
And I think as I look back in that environment, the private equity firms came in and really created value in a number of areas. But one area was kind of coming in and professionalizing and cleaning up the company. And they were willing to deal with, accounting issues, personnel issues, this issue, that issue. And fast forward 25 years, we've seen multiples double.
Yep.
We've seen multiples double. I think, the good companies, until the recent economic hiccup, which I'm sure we'll talk about, good companies were selling for 10 to 12 to 14 times EBITDA.
Yeah, I was about to say, I did the last deal. I did a 14, a deal at 14,
Plus, depending on the market and the dynamics of the company. But what we've seen is that the buyers have very high standards now. And so the level of preparation necessary to successfully sell a company for a premium now is very significantly different than it's been over the past 25 years. And so what we've seen in our market, and, Corey, I think you see this as well, is a lot of these companies that we're working with are, smaller companies. They don't have a full management team. They don't necessarily have the need or the requirement for audited financial statements. That in the day-to-day running of their business, they can get by with, cutting some corners and being practical and not having every T crossed and I dotted. And many of these business owners that come to us don't fully understand what it takes to sell their company for a premium and how clean they have to be. Yeah. And so over the last couple of years, 5 to 10 years, I've spent more and more time counseling people pre-sale on how important it is to have clean accounting, how important it is to have this, how important it is to have that, so that by the time they show up ready to sell, that they're ready and we're not like quote unquote, fixing the airplane while we're flying it, if that's a good analogy. And I think one of the things that I'm really excited about is, helping people really understand what it takes to sell for a premium, so that by the time they show up to us or any other investment bank, there's actually a product or an asset there that can be sold for a premium, and they don't have any of these risk factors or fatal flaws that either cause them to not be able to sell their company or retain too much liability or have big earnouts or, not get a premium valuation. And so I think more and more we're seeing people take the time and effort to do the preparation necessary so that they can get a premium.
Yeah. I definitely second that. We've seen that same evolution, and obviously we get involved in helping them pre-prep on the legal due diligence side. Mm-hmm. The accountant should be helping them pre-prep on the accounting and, tax financial side. And obviously guys like you, quarterback that process to help them really be presented professionally. And listen, there are things now that would kill your deal that wouldn't have killed your deal in the 90s, or are going to cost you significantly on valuation or deal structure.
Yeah,
no question.
Exactly.
No question.
And it's interesting. One of the things that we do is, it does take nine months plus or minus to sell a company. So, it's January 2023 right now. If we were to start a sale process for a company right now, we would want to be selling the company based on a multiple of their 2023 projected financials, most likely either revenue or EBITDA. What that means is from a financial standpoint, that means a company needs to have, really good, well thought out financial projections so that we can sit down with a buyer and look them in the eye and have the supporting detail and the track record so that the projections are believable and achievable, so that we can get people to pay based on the future results, not based on the past results. Mm-hmm. And the number of companies that I've worked with that like either don't do budgets or don't take the budgeting process very seriously or don't see a need for it, it's very, very difficult when we get hired to come in to do a sale process to be the first person or the first team that's ever put a financial projection together and have it, really stand up to scrutiny. And so that's something that when companies come to us and they have a budgeting process, they understand the drivers of their business. They can say, look, if we do this in sales and we do this in operations, we do this here and we do this there, and this is how it all rolls into our financials. And I know that because I did 10 sales calls in January or whatever it is, I'm going to hit X in revenue for this year. When companies really have that dialed in, it's a hell of a lot easier to sell their company based on the projected results rather than like, oh, hey, this is the first time we ever did a budget. I think revenue is going to be X. And if revenue is X, we're going to do Y in profit. Like that makes it a lot trickier. And that's just kind of one example of the types of preparation that can really help.
Yeah, no, that's great. So, you talk about this conversation of getting a premium valuation, and certainly what you just talked about is one of the ways. Do you have one or two others you want to mention in terms of what companies can do to get a premium valuation?
Yeah, I think there's two things that are going on in a sale process. And when we get introduced to companies that we think about taking on as a client, we look at the factors that just make the company saleable or not saleable. And then we also look at the things that are kind of value drivers in the business. And in terms of the value drivers, I think the biggest one is the couple that come to mind right away. One is understanding what drives value in that particular sector for that particular company. Yep. So in the 90s, just as an example, in the 90s, there was a roll-up going on in the printing industry. And we sold a commercial printing business for, very nice company for 7.5 times EBITDA. And we had 6 or 7 offers from all the companies that were doing consolidations and had this like really competitive auction. 15 years later, I got hired by a printing company that arguably was a better company with a better client base, better technology, better, but the buyers weren't there to support it. And so this gentleman built a really nice business, but he didn't really spend the time understanding what drives value in his industry. And so created a situation where it wasn't saleable at a premium, where had, 15 years earlier, what he built would have been saleable at a high premium. So every industry has different things. And so I think sort of doing the research and sticking your head up and looking around at what's going on, what drives value, who's going to buy this thing, what do I need to build to build, A, I need to build a good business, and B, I need to build something that's valuable. I think that's one value driver.
Yeah.
It's different for different companies. It's different for different sectors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it takes some work and thought to figure it out. I think that's one thing that's like really critically important. And then I think the second thing is trying to engineer or build in predictability into the business, whether it's recurring revenue, having more predictable revenue streams, understanding if I do this in January, it gets me here, and systematizing and making the business predictable. I think those are two things that are, really, really important value drivers beyond the obvious of have more revenue or have more EBITDA. But again, like just understanding what drives value in your specific sector and then making the business as predictable as possible. And then the third one, and this is something that we spend a lot of time with our clients on, is understanding what their sort of differentiation is or unique or special sauce. A lot of business owners come to us and they're like, oh, hey, my company makes, widgets. And it's like, well, no one really wants to buy you because you're a widget manufacturer. They want to buy you because you're the best widget manufacturer for this particular purpose. And here's why you're better than the competition, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the more clear business owners and managers are on that and they build that into their strategy, the more successful their business will be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so, those kind of 3 things that take some real thought and effort can make a huge difference. And they're not something you can wake up on Monday morning and implement by Wednesday. They take some time, and thought and effort.
Yeah. Listen, there's a concept that those of us in the deal space know where, it's something that people say in the entrepreneurial space, but only a percentage of companies that do it. And that is, that it makes sense to build your business as if you're going to sell it, whether you're going to sell it or not, right? Because the things that you would do for that, the things that you talked about, whether it's creating more predictable, income through recurring revenue or subscription, whatever it is, whether it's creating a clear value proposition that distinguishes yourself from the competition, all of that stuff's going to help you even if you never sell, right? So it really makes sense. And like you said, you can't do it in days or weeks or even really months. Some of these things are really most effectively done for years. So you can so actually the buyer can see that track record of, that recurring revenue or that, the market's response to that value proposition.
It's interesting. I worked at a private equity firm early in my career. And while I was there, I was deeply involved in buying 6 companies, and the firm bought north of 20. While I was there with the companies I was involved in, like we would make the investment or make the acquisition. in one of the first meetings we would have with management is like, hey, let's come out of this meeting with here are the 7 or 8 things or 5 or 6 things that we think are going to drive value long term. And then we would sort of force the management team or suggest to the management team or request that the management team kind of put together a dashboard of those things. And then we would look at them at the board meetings and talk about them. And so that was a way to get management focused on the value drivers in the business. Mm-hmm. And, the fund that I work for had a top quartile return. And I think, yes, we made good investments and yada, yada, yada. But I think getting the management teams focused on sort of the few kind of core key things that they should be working on to build the value of the company made a big difference. I have yet to walk into a private company and have them have any sort of dashboard or set of metrics or thought about what drives value.
Yeah.
And I find that really interesting. The private equity firms do it. And despite the rumors you hear about private equity firms, they've attracted $1 bazillion over the last 10 years because they're making money. And they're making money because they get the companies focused on creating value. I just always find it interesting that the private companies and, sort of non-institutional businesses don't really spend a little bit more time thinking that way.
Yeah, it's true. And listen, to some extent, that's what actually helps some deals get done, is the fact that there are more professional buyers who can see the additional opportunities, right? So they can pay,
yeah.
and that's why they can pay these higher multiples. They can pay what is a fair multiple, a good multiple for the existing business. But there's a gap where they see where they can increase enterprise value significantly through whether it's recurring revenue opportunities, additional markets, whatever it is. And that's what makes it more attractive to the buyers. So, it is a little bit of a difference. I mean, if the smaller companies were so efficient and had taken advantage of all that stuff, they'd be better off. But at the same time, you wouldn't have that. Buyers like when they see a business, right, where they say, oh, that's a good business. And you know what? Yeah. We can do this on top of that and really have it become multiples of what it is.
Exactly.
Good stuff. So I want to just spend a couple of minutes because I do want to get more specifically over to the valuation side of things, mainly because it's been a while since we spoke more specifically on the podcast about valuation, and we've done more on the investment banking side. But before we go there, I do want to get you a view. You alluded to it earlier. I mean, obviously, we've had a heck of a good run. Private equity's had a heck of a good run. Investment bankers have had a good run. Deals lawyers have had a heck of a good run. Companies that, sellers and multiples. And at the same time, while it's still, there still seems to be deal volume and plenty of money around, you have some headwinds, right? Inflation, interest rates, cost of capital has gone up significantly. Concerns about economy, recession, all this stuff that goes around. What are you seeing as far as its impact listen, none of us have a crystal ball. And, you might have a view of what you think's going to happen. We don't know for sure, but certainly, what's happening. What are you seeing about currently the impact, if anything, on deal volume, deal structures, deal valuation? And also, what do you think we're seeing? We're recording this in January, probably won't be released until March. But, what are we looking at in 2020?
Yes, I gotta be careful what I say because people have the benefit of hindsight by the time they,
exactly.
I do have the same kind of like cracked and broken, cloudy crystal ball that you're using. But one of the things that we've seen, and we closed a fairly sizable transaction in November, and the buyer was having trouble arranging bank financing. And, they kept saying to us, hey, we're going to have term sheets for the banks next week. And, finally we got with our client and it's like, look, we want to get this we like the transaction. We want to get it closed before anything else changes in the market. And so we went to the buyer and offered to do seller financing. And so this private equity transaction that we closed in November was closed without any third party financing. It was closed. And again, I think there was a little bit of a unique structure here that made it workable, but our client put a third of the money that they took out of the company back in the form of a seller note. Yep. And what was interesting is the seller note, I believe, is at a 10% interest rate and it has escalators going forward. And so my client is sitting there like, hey, I'm getting all this money. The economy is so volatile. I don't know where to invest it anyway. And so I can take part of it and invest it at a 10% interest rate in a company that I'm going to continue to run and be senior to everybody else. Like that's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
And so as I've talked to my other buddies at other investment banking firms and private equity firms, I think more and more people are starting to see kind of clever and creative deal structures to work around higher interest costs, which is one thing that, I saw in general. And I think that we'll continue to see. But I think generally speaking, when you see a higher cost of capital environment with interest rates going up, that's going to kind of depress valuations a bit. And again, when you basically say valuations are depressed compared to 2021, you're comparing valuations to like an absolute peak.
Yes.
So it seems to me they might go back to 2015, 2016, 2017 levels, which are still robust relative to historical norms. And then the second thing that we're seeing is I think that investors are being a little bit more picky about which sectors and which companies they invest in. The consumer space, I think there's a lot of concern about consumer spending. And so the consumer space seems to be a little bit tougher. The B2B companies seem to be doing well. In our manufacturing group, we have a thesis that because of a lot of the supply chain issues and global instability, a lot of more and more manufacturing is going to come back to the United States, which is going to create some M&A work. Our software and tech group is like crazy busy. Our business services group in certain sectors is crazy busy. And so there's some sector specific stuff going on. And so I kind of feel like, well, I missed 2021 because that was a very, very robust M&A market. I kind of feel like we're going to be back to 2018, 2019 levels. And then the last thing that I see is private equity has raised so much money over the last decade. And the way private equity is structurally set up, it's kind of a use it or lose it.
Yeah, they have to deploy capital.
It's kind of a use it or lose it thing. And so they've got to continue to deploy capital.
Yeah.
And, they're not dummies and they're not going to just willy-nilly deploy it. But there is a supply and demand imbalance in terms there's been a lot of capital and deal flow is appears to be slowing down a little bit. And so that should put some upward pressure on, multiples and the deal market. So it'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out. There's, economic volatility and interest rates and inflation on one side, and there's still a massive availability of capital on the other side. And so it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out, but I'm cautiously optimistic about the year. And our firm is also seeing, we spoke to a lot of companies who kind of in February, March, April, May last year, they kind of decided, hey, I'm not going to start a sale process into an uncertain economic environment. We want to revisit next year. And we've already seen a lot of companies reaching out to us in December and this week, wanting to get together and think about doing something this year. And so I feel like it'll be tricky, but there's some areas where there are tailwinds.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with that. And, there's some interesting factors that I try to remind people of, even with interest rates going up. Like you mentioned that, all right, valuations are down from peak 21, early 22, whatever valuations, but they're still comparatively pretty good, right? You got to keep that in mind. And even with interest rates, interest rates are not that high historically. The truth of the matter is not that rates are high. We were just in an artificially low interest rate environment for a historically long period of time. I remember when interest rates were in the teens in the 70s. I'm not saying that that's, the norm, but even, they're not bad. They're just bad compared to what we got used to in the last decade,
Yeah. In year 2000, when my wife and I bought our first house, our interest rate was 8.75%.
Yeah.
And so, they're still low relative to that.
Yeah, exactly. So,
yes.
Listen, I think we all know markets take time to adjust when there's changing circumstances. And I'm not saying that the cost of capital, going up as rapidly as it has, it doesn't have an impact. Yeah, but then people sort of get used to it and things get normalized, deals get repriced, right? And then the market starts going along again.
Yeah. And I think there's also an element of like business owners kind of, there's a demographic thing going on where the baby boomers are aging out. And I think there's a psychological element of like people kind of going through different stages of grief. But it's like, hey, I missed my window to sell in 2021 at an all-time high. Now I'm operating my company in a tougher environment. My choice now is to operate in this really tough, uncertain environment or to sell my company for less than I would have gotten in 2021. But I still need to sell my company for the following reasons. And so I think things will kind of normalize. What I've seen over the last 25, 30 years during periods of extreme change and uncertainty, that's when the market slows down. But the market's been strong. The M&A market has been good during periods of stability. So hopefully we're coming into like a new normal or whatever you want to call it. So we'll see.
Sounds good. Let's take a break from the show for a minute so I can tell you about an incredible resource my team and I have put together for you. Secrets of Deal-Driven Growth, Creative Ways to Grow Your Business, Even in Challenging Times, is a powerful ebook that helps you take DealQuest podcast episodes and apply them to your own life and business. This is the ideal tool for anyone looking for creative ways to grow as deal makers, and you can get yours now. It's as easy as heading to coreycupfer.com/workbook and downloading your copy. While you're there, you can also consider joining our dynamic deal-driven community of founders, experts, small business owners, and entrepreneurs. Now back to the show. All right, so let's talk a little bit more on the valuation side, right? Because, most investment banking firms do some sort of valuation work, but this is a particular strength of you and your firm. It's a significant area of what you do in addition to the investment banking. So tell us a little bit more about that and talk to us about what you've seen in terms of valuations. I mean, you mentioned most of our listeners are pretty sophisticated, but we have some, our listeners have expanded so much. I've mentioned recently, I remember the days when I first started this thing and I had 60 or 80 people listen to an episode, and now we got 9,000 we got 40,000 downloads a month. And some of the listeners are also newer, whatever, even define some terms for those folks. And in the various industries, what are the different ways evaluations are done? How are they, and then how they've been impacted by these various factors we've been talking about?
Yeah. It's interesting. Our firm, the way I think about it is there's kind of three legs to the stool in our valuation practice. We do a fair amount of valuation for financial reporting. So companies that have audited financial statements need to value and revalue different assets and liabilities that go on the balance sheet to support their audits. All of the underlying analytics is very similar to a normal business valuation. It's just used for balance sheet purposes. The second area that we spend a lot of time on is tax compliance.
Yep.
There's companies granting stock options are required to do valuations. There's a fair amount of estate and gift tax planning going on. I actually think this year there could be a really interesting opportunity with depressed valuations for people to move assets out of their estate and take advantage of market volatility, higher interest rates, lower asset values. And we're hearing a lot of estate planning attorneys and business owners talking that, this year may be a really neat opportunity for that. And then the third area, which I think is probably the most interesting for your listeners, is we do a fair amount of advisory valuation. And it's everything from one partner wants to buy another partner out.
Yep.
And they need a basis to sit down and negotiate a deal to help me prepare to raise money, help me prepare to sell my company, help me make a decision. Do I sell my company or do a transaction this year? Do I do a transaction next year? What if I wait 5 years? Sort of this whole decision support metric. One of the things that I think are really enjoyable valuations is when people come to us and say, I've got a good business. I'm trying to figure out what to do. We do a baseline for them in terms of, what's it worth today?
Yep.
And then we help think about what are the things that we can do to improve the value. And, what are the things we can do to improve the value of the company? If I go make acquisitions, what does that look like? If I do this, what does it look like? If I do that, what does it look like? If I raise money and give up some ownership today, but how much faster do I have to grow to have that be accretive to me? And there's a lot of different kind of scenarios that we can run for business owners. And then you're in a situation where, what do I have to believe today to make this be the absolute best decision for me and what I'm trying to accomplish? And we can help people sort of quantify that in their own mind. And those are the really kind of fun and enjoyable projects that we work on that can make a big difference. And one of the things I've learned over the years doing these things is that it's when you sit down with a business owner and listen to what they're trying to accomplish and then the decision they're trying to make, it all makes sense. But then if you really put pen to paper, it's like, hey, actually, everything has to go exactly perfectly for the scenario you're talking about to be best. Have you thought about this risk and that risk and this issue and that issue and this idea and that idea? We've often been able to help change people's minds to either take a more aggressive approach or a more conservative approach, or turn left or turn right. And one example comes to mind. We were working with a company, and it was in the retail technology space, and they had a really nice business, very stable, cash flow positive, stable and steady. And there was an investor group that wanted them to raise money and invest in the next generation of technology. And then there was another investor group that was like, hey, we should just sell this and let someone else take that risk.
Right.
And, there was kind of a heated debate among the investor groups. And so we worked with the management team and we modeled out different scenarios for each. And it was like, for the raise money, develop new technology, these are the 3 or 4 things you have to absolutely believe to be true today to have that be a better decision. And then for the other people that kind of wanted to just sell the company today, here's the 3 or 4 things that you have to believe for that to be true, for this to be the best decision. And it really created an interesting discussion at the board level so they could make the right decision for what they were trying to accomplish with the company. And it was not the decision they ultimately wound up with was not necessarily what sounded like it made sense on the surface, but getting into it and doing some more research was really helpful. And so I think a combination of this stuff is doing the valuation research in terms of where the public companies are trading, what other transactions are taking place in the market, what does the buyer landscape look like today, et cetera, to really get a basis for the value today and the direction the industry is going and the likelihood of a sale. That's kind of one piece of it, which is sort of the traditional valuation work. And then the second piece is, doing some scenario analysis on the financial projections, one way or the other, to sort of stress test the different outcomes. And so there can be some really interesting discussions and insights that come out of those types of analyses.
Yeah, I love that you stress that, because obviously, there's that part of valuation that is whatever, looking at all the factors, running numbers, and I don't want to minimize that. It's not as simple as plugging some numbers into a spreadsheet. It's a complex process, where every valuation firm has how do they weight the different factors. And I talk to clients all the time. But first of all, depending upon the industry, you don't even know what multiples you're using. We've been talking about EBITDA multiples, which is probably the most common. But, there are annual ARR, annual recurring revenue in certain industries that on house value. There are certain industries we use discounted cash flow analysis, whatever it is. So the methodology is different. But also, there are so many factors, that go into it. For certain businesses, growth rates, right? We do a lot in financial services and wealth management. They, the valuations firms in that industry look at average age of clients, length of client relationship, right?
Demographics of the client.
Clients who are all 85 years old, they're not as valuable as clients who are 55 years old,
Yeah. And it's interesting in the consumer space, particularly like direct to consumer e-commerce space, a lot of the metrics are not necessarily revenue or EBITDA at all. It's what does it cost you to get a client and lifetime value, cost of acquisition, lifetime value, retention rate, upsell, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those are very significant, value drivers, where two companies that have a similar kind of growth ramp and trajectory, one has more valuable customers than the other. It's worth quite a bit. It's worth quite a bit more. And so kind of peeling the onion couple layers is really important. And you alluded to software. Some software companies trade at 4 times revenue. Some trade at 12. And you really have to kind of peel the onion a couple layers and understand the underlying metrics to understand why. So, valuation is part science, and it's many times it's as much an art project as it is a science project.
Yeah. So I love it because you handle all of that complexity, but then what you were pointing to is that on top of that, you provide, really important strategic, consulting and advice, right? Where it's like, okay, so now we have numbers and if we're just valuing for the purpose of an acquisition, right? And we're in a certain industry and we're going to apply certain multiple, certain factors. Okay, there's that. But you're also providing that strategic consulting to say, hey, let's analyze, some of these numbers and let's figure out how we help you make business decisions based upon some of these analyses and factors.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, which is great, which is fantastic. So listen, Channing, I could delve into any one of these many topics that we've raised for hours more, but we are coming to the end here. So before I ask you my final question on the podcast, listen, I'm sure people are going to be interested in hearing more about what you do. You provide on both sides, the valuation side and the investment banking side, such, great services for quality clients. Where can they find out more about you?
Yeah, I think the easiest way is to go to our website, objectivecp, as in capitalpartners.com. And my contact info is on there, as is everybody else at my firm. So that'd be the easiest way to learn more about us, and really appreciate you having me.
Perfect. All right. My final question on the podcast is about my highest ideal in life, which is freedom. And for me, that means everything from freedom from all people in the world from oppression to why I've been an entrepreneur for decades and haven't had a boss. What does freedom mean to you, and how does it impact your life and business?
I started on this entrepreneurial journey as a founder of a firm about 20 years ago now, and really enjoyed not having a boss and, like the freedom to figure things out on my own. And, sometimes I've made colossal mistakes and sometimes it's worked out well, but I have no one to blame but the guy I see in the mirror every morning. And so
there you go.
I really enjoy that. And then I think the second freedom that I spend a lot of time thinking about as a entrepreneur or a leader is we all have a choice for what we commit to and what we delegate. And when I find myself in this place where I'm like frenetic and crazy busy, I have no one to blame but myself. And there's a cartoon that I have on my desk that I got from Strategic Coach.
Yep.
And there's a picture of a person with their office door closed and a big stack of paper, and they're like working away. And there's a note on the door that says, "Leave me alone. I have a week of work to get done in the next 4 hours because I have the time management skills of a carrot." And so I always think that the freedom, we all have the freedom. It's just a matter of choosing what we commit to and what we don't commit to. And that's something I spend a lot of time thinking about.
Love that. Love that answer. Channing Hamlet, thanks for being such a great guest on the DealQuest podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed the discussion.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of DealQuest, where we help you understand how deal-driven growth can be your ticket to freedom. I want to invite you to a unique way to tap into the wisdom and experience of the DealQuest community. The Deal Den is a place where entrepreneurs, high-level executives, and business leaders come together, support each other's growth and success, and share what's working best, as well as what challenges we are facing right now. You will get input not only from me, but from all of our members. We collaborate and serve each other. To join us, go to coreycupfer.com/dealden. I'll see you there. I'm Corey Kupfer. Until next week, wishing you the freedom and financial prosperity that I know your DealQuest will bring.